Hey, welcome to episode 18 of the Woke-ish podcast. This is Ebony.
And this is Alma.
And this week we've got something super interesting cooked up for y'all in the What's Being Slept On segment. And in fact, I think it's so interesting that I'm going to save the discussion until later. For now, we will jump into our shout-out segment.
Yes.
And so first on the list is Jahana Hayes, the 2016 National Teacher of the Year, who won the Democratic primary for Connecticut's 5th Congressional District. If she wins, she will not only be the state's first Black Democrat in Congress, but she will also be the first Black Congresswoman from any New England state. After her win, Times reports Hayes telling her supporters, "When we started this campaign a little more than 100 days ago, we had no organization and no network. People told us we had no chance and no business trying to upset the status quo. And tonight, we proved them wrong." In 2016, Hayes was named National Teacher of the Year by President Barack Obama. At the time, she was a social studies teacher at John F. Kennedy High School in Waterbury, Connecticut. Her story of overcoming poverty, a drug-addicted mother, and a teen pregnancy earned her praise from the White House. In a recent interview with the New York Times, Hayes said that despite never having run for public office before, she feels she has a responsibility to do more for her community. She's quoted saying, "We need someone who will speak to what's happening in public education, what's happening on our borders, what's happening to our organized labor unions, because all these people who work every day and contribute in our community feel like they're left out of the conversation," she explained. Yes, so shout out to Jahana Hayes. Doing big things.
Like the first Black Congresswoman from any New England state. That's insane.
Yeah.
And they're pretty freaking, like, always, saying how much more liberal and progressive they are than the southern states. Mm-hmm. But here's another example that, representation really matters because we can't always depend on other people to speak for us.
Yeah.
And so our second shout out for today goes to Al Jackson. You may have seen the viral video being shared around social media, but he went on the Daily Blast Live to discuss kneeling during the NFL preseason games. So this is a live show. And in it, he kind of started discussing some of the criticisms about the NFL players, a couple of the NFL players who chose to kneel during the preseason games. And he said that much of the criticism against NFL players kneeling has been centered around the players' action being disrespectful of veterans. He sounded off on the poor treatment of veterans in the U.S. So I liked how he took the criticism instead of just going towards this isn't what it's about. This is more than this isn't about the flag. He went specifically for the criticism of people who saying it was disrespectful to veterans and kind of showing how people who were making that criticism were hypocrites. So just kind of saying that he was critical of people who are against the NFL protests that focus on veterans, because he said that while people like to talk about respecting the veterans, he thinks very little is done to protect them after they return from serving, which is very true. Mm-hmm. There are very few services available, and if you remember the whole debacle with the Veterans Affairs Administration, like the person in charge resigned, they had very poor organization. He also brought up the hypocrisy of those who oppose the NFL protests, bringing up specifically President Trump's comments on Senator John McCain, who is a Vietnam War veteran. So kind of saying, for someone like Trump to be saying that these people are disrespecting veterans, how can he say that when he himself has specifically disrespected veterans?
Like, what?
Well, and not just like a veteran, but a war hero.
Yeah, and someone who's in his party.
Yes,
if we're talking about, being loyal or whatever to your party.
So I thought it was very much it was an interesting and a creative way to address a topic, a part of that conversation that I think a lot of people weren't focusing on. And I really liked how he was very passionate, and you and I were talking that he even threw something on the table. And I think it's just, it was just great to see. You can tell that the other people on the other commentators or hosts were totally unprepared for what was about to happen. But that anytime, I think this shows us, anytime you have an opportunity to voice your opinion, if you just try, there's a way to do this in a way that logically and with facts and examples just shows the kind of hypocrisy or the contradiction among some of the arguments. And so shout out to Al Jackson. If you haven't seen the video, I'm sure you can just look him up on Instagram.
I guess
we posted it on our Wokish Podcast IG. So if you want to see what we're talking about, just click to that clip, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. But definitely shout out to Al Jackson.
Did you say we're going to be talking about this again or no?
No,
because one thing that I don't know, I guess I could ask you like what you think. I think that yes, we have opportunities to speak up, right? In instances like where we're witnessing, like you're saying, hypocrisy. And the way he went about it was very intentional and strategic, because he said, oh, okay, well, every time we try to have this conversation and when we bring up police brutality, y'all don't want to hear that because y'all don't want to talk about black people. Fine, let's not talk about black people then. Let's talk about veterans, which y'all like to talk about. You know? And so I wonder, while I do think that is effective, I wonder if there's anything lost to the speaker. Like, whether it be Al Jackson or somebody else, it's like, if we are most passionate about police, it's kind of like, okay, for instance, where rather than encouraging companies to have diversity and to hire people of color for the sake of employing people of color and not just having like racially homogenous spaces, we say, oh, it's actually good for your bottom line. Yeah. You know? And so it's like, even though what we actually care about is you employing our people, employing more than just white people, we are meeting you where you're at. And we're saying, okay, well, if this is your concern, then this is how it'll help you too. You know? And so, and I guess that's kind of what, like, essentially what he was doing too, like playing the game. And I wonder if that, like, how do we feel about that? Like, is that, I don't know, like, is that kind of like selling your soul a little bit?
I think that, I don't know. I feel like sometimes there's more than one way to approach things. And so that there are people who are sticking to the direct police brutality link. Mm-hmm. But I appreciated him talking about and focusing on an aspect of it that I think will make it more difficult for people to come back and say, and now, like, honestly, hearing this, I can now use this argument in addition to the police brutality argument. So I think that because it was live and probably, I don't think he planned on, like, saying all of this beforehand, but it was just something that he said at the moment. But I think you're right. Like, I don't think that we should always just try to focus on what will be most appealing and most accepted by people, because we still need to make sure to remember, like, this is about police brutality. And
but it's like, how do you make white people care about that? Like, I know. How do you know? And so I think, I mean, because we talked about this before on our episode on mental health, where we were saying that everybody's talking about veterans, but veterans have some of the highest rates of suicide. Yeah. You know, and so you think of a place like Montana that's full of grass and cows, and also Montana is known for having the highest rates of suicide of any state in the country because of veterans. And it's like, how can Donald Trump sit and talk about how much our country cares about and values veterans when we throw them away like trash as soon as they get back?
Yeah, no, and I think that it's our job to keep, because I think as America loves stories, loves narratives about ideals, and we romanticize what our country is and what it used to be and what it's going to become. And so I think that we have to point out the difference between a story and reality. And for a lot of, I think people love seeing 2 or 3 veterans recognized during a football game, but they don't love...
Yeah, like those 90-year-old
Yeah, vets. But I bet you most people that listen to us didn't know the statistics about veterans having high suicide rates, or about, didn't put 2 and 2 together about the poor treatment of veterans. Like, we totally have forgotten about the fact that there wasn't even a stable leader of Veterans Affairs because he resigned. And so I think that we just have to keep doing what Al Jackson did, which is find any opportunity to just keep poking at the illusion that some people try to have about this country and remind people, like, those stories aren't reflective of many people's experiences. Yeah. So two good shout outs. And if you have any shout outs that you'd like for us to share, we always give you the information at the end of the episode, but definitely send those this way. We'd love to highlight any good towards the community. It doesn't have to be something like being a representative, like we did in our first shout out, but it could be something like a video that you saw of someone just like spouting out facts and being really passionate about an issue that we think that a lot of people who are listening would care about.
Yeah. Okay, so now we'll transition into our In the Know segment. Okay, so now for our In the Know segment. So first on the docket is Becca Cosmetics. So you may have seen this story floating around. I guess it went viral on Twitter. And so Becca Cosmetics faced backlash last week after they did a makeup campaign. And they had, like, in the makeup campaign, there were hands kind of featured to show off, like, how well the makeup blended into the skin. Mm-hmm. And they had, like, a variation of skin complexions. But rather than using actual women of color, they just used, I guess, white women and darkened their hands.
Yes, like
colored, painted their hands brown. And so they, and this collection was called the Skin Love collection, which is hella ironic. So one tweet, which eventually, like, I guess people had been tweeting about this and Becca Cosmetics didn't respond, but one tweet that eventually caught the attention of Becca went viral, where the woman said, "So did Becca Cosmetics really refuse to hire black women for these swatches? They just edited a white hand darker. Look at the two darker hands' palms," the Twitter user wrote. So where they got caught up is that they, I guess, were under the assumption that black people's hands look the same on, like, the outside of the hand and the palm. So they colored the entire hand, like, dark brown.
Yeah, like, there was no palm.
There was no palm.
Dark.
Yeah. So Becca eventually took to Twitter to apologize for this mishap, saying, "Thanks to everyone who shared feedback on our recent arm swatch image. We hear you, and we want you to know that we remain committed to continually representing our inclusive Becca beauties." The Instagram caption reads, "Some insights. Truth. The image featured 4 models of different ethnicities. Truth. We acknowledge the way we adjusted the image. Missed the mark and are deeply sorry for this oversight. Truth. Becca is committed to showcasing the lightest to the deepest skin tones and hiring inclusive models for our campaigns. To demonstrate this commitment, we've reshot the real girls from the Becca office." So this might seem minor, but I don't think we can continue letting companies continue to sidestep over and around diversity and representation, whether it be the fashion industry or the beauty industry. This is just a microcosm of a bigger issue where companies evade actual diversity and just fake it. So it's like, you know, you're saying all these truths about how committed you are to inclusivity, yet you didn't do it just because you were being lazy.
Yeah.
You could have easily found models. You only had, I think it was like 4 people, 4 hands.
4 hands.
Like, you only needed 4 models. Like, that's not that that hard I could find 4 models to model their hands, you know? So yeah, I mean, I think it's just like laziness. And if companies don't get called out on this, then they'll continue to do it, because why not? Like, it's cheap, it's easy. Like, why not just take, 4 white girls that already work at your place and just color their hands? I mean, you could have also just Googled what a black person's hand looks like, and you would have seen that the palm is a different color, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, I just think that we gotta this is not even I was gonna say we have to start holding companies to a higher standard, but that's not even higher. That's like basic. Yeah. That's not a higher standard. It's like, no, just get the models that match the complexion that you're looking for.
Yeah. And some people would just say, what does it matter? Like, why is it so important? It's because specifically...
Like blackface.
Well, specifically, this is makeup that was, like, from light to dark.
Yeah.
So it's like the thing that you're saying makes you more competitive and different. Why I should buy your makeup. You're telling people of color who are of a darker hue that you have colors for us. But yet you can't even find people of color to showcase so the color, how the color would look on the so to me, it's just kind of like, well, for this specific example, I think it's very important to call them out because they are trying to profit from people of color by saying, we have something that caters to your need. But the fact that you couldn't even find someone who looks like me to represent that. And then Ebony and I were talking that they specifically said ethnicities. They didn't say people of different races. Yeah. They just said people of different ethnicities. So technically, it could be 4 still white girls who one happens to be like Irish, Italian. German, yeah. And so they were like, oh, they were 4 different ethnic groups. But so we were diverse, but that's still, and I to me, when I read that, I was like, it just made me more angry because it's like, well, you're not even recognizing the fact that you didn't have any other racial groups.
You're not really apologizing for what you did, which is, again, like, what's the difference between that and blackface? They for sure would not have put a white woman's face on an ad and colored it brown.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, that would be wild. That would be
I mean, there have
wild.
been,
maybe they thought about doing the face, but they were like, you know what, the hand is not safe. As bad. Yeah, it's a little safer. But it's like, no, you cannot take somebody's white skin and color it brown and push that person forward like a black person. It doesn't work.
And call yourself diverse.
Yeah, no, what? Yeah. Okay. Anyways, on to the second in the know.
Yeah, so the second in the know is based on a video that was kind of one of the people that circulated was Sean King. And it shows a very graphic video of an incident in Baltimore where not just one, but like several Baltimore police officers were just kind of what I would call assaulting a black man. And so specifically, there was one black police officer that was just like pounding on the black man. And so a former Baltimore City police officer has been indicted by a grand jury on criminal charges, including first-degree assault after the video surfaced that showed him repeatedly punching a man in the face. So this man wasn't hitting back. This man was like being held down because I think there was 3 or 4 police officers involved in the altercation, but specifically this one black police officer was just like hitting him in the face. So the video happened on Saturday. I mean, the incident in the video happened on Saturday. So like I don't know last week. On the 11th, I think? The 11th, August 11th. And then hours later, the Baltimore Police Department suspended the officer, who is now identified as Arthur Williams. And then late Sunday, so the following day, the 12th, the department accepted his resignation. So he wasn't fired, he was suspended, and then he resigned. In the video, the officers exchanged sharp words with a man who has been identified as 26-year-old Deshaun McGreer. Then Williams suddenly starts striking him and hits him more than a dozen times, often in the face. State Attorney Marilyn Mosby told reporters Tuesday that a warrant has now been issued for his arrest and says that it is important that the community knows that there is one standard of justice, no matter your sex, race, religion, or occupation. Police officers are sworn to protect and serve, and when that oath is taken for granted and an abuse of that power is evident, we will hold them accountable to the fullest extent of the law. This is an integral part to rebuilding trust in our criminal justice system. And I scoffed because of, I don't know, Ebony and I kind of didn't fully feel satisfied by this.
No. And you mentioned that the officer's black, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, well, I don't know. I'm so conflicted. Like, my feelings about this are so conflicted because, and this is why I think this is, like you said, a very good transition to our what's being slept on topic for the week, because one of the things that I have been debating for the last, since whenever this announcement was made is, am I satisfied with this?
Yeah.
Because this is a black officer, and this is the fastest I've seen any DA move on taking like charges against a police officer.
Not even when people have died.
Yeah. I mean, cops have, like, gunned down, shot in the back
14
black men.
children.
Yes, children. And charges haven't been brought against them for, like, months.
Yeah.
And it literally takes people turning the city upside down for people to consider pressing charges. Yeah. And so for this to be, like, a few days in between.
The day after.
Yeah. It's like, so the question is, like, you know, was she inspired to move or was she compelled to move so quickly by the fact that this officer was black? Mm-hmm. Like, would she have moved so quickly if the officer was white? Would she have moved at all?
Yeah. And then Sean King in his post about this said that he has written about, because Sean King is a journalist, about the fact that officers of color, specifically black officers, are more often what's it called, like filed complaints against or gotten in trouble or written up more often than white officers. And we see this not only with police officers, but also with children and, like, you know, black children are more likely to be written up, even for, like, if a black child and a white child both commit the same break the exact same rules. A black child will most likely not only be written up, but be given a harsher punishment. And so Sean King was saying that this is something similar found among police officers, where black police officers are more likely to be written up and given harsher punishments. And I think that that's exactly how I felt, because so many of the white police officers that, like, were shown to have killed someone. And I'm not even saying, like, be fired, because I just don't even know when we're going to get to that point. But like Ebony said, like, there was just no movement made towards even recognizing that a wrong had been done. And here you have a statement that says that, you know, we want to build trust with the community, like, officers are here to protect. And I don't recall ever, the only statements people make is the officer feels very deeply about what happened, and he
like, deeply what?
Yeah, and just kind of like saying, like, oh, this was hard on the officer too, even though the guy was a criminal. And here they're not even saying, oh, the guy was a criminal, you know, the officer, no story of the officer was defending himself, you don't know the whole truth, the guy has just shot up someone, nothing. It was just automatically like, oh, the officer was in the wrong, he's no longer a part of the police department. And so although I think it's great that we're holding people accountable, because no police officer should be able to like to violently assault someone like that, especially someone who was being held down,
and knowing, because I think that cops take advantage, this cop definitely, like, officers take advantage of the fact that individuals can't fight back. And they know that, especially black men. It's like, oh, like, you fight back, you could easily be killed, and then it be justified. You know, because you were evading arrest. And so by this man not doing anything or not swinging back, he's actually, you know, doing the thing that probably saved his life. Ultimately. But this cop, like, you definitely know that. One thing, though, I think that does add a little bit more nuance is that Sean King did say that she has, she's charged more cops than any DA in America, and that she apparently was also the person that pushed for the cops responsible for Freddie Gray's death to be charged. And so it's like, okay, she herself may be a decent prosecutor, right? But, like, I mean, we have to, like, this is not the only city in the... Baltimore is not the only city in the country where things like this happen. And so we have to... It's not enough to say, oh, yeah, she's doing this. Like, no, she's a representation of our judicial system more broadly. And there are cities where this is... We can't... I mean, we've seen this in Ferguson. Like, you don't see this kind of stuff happening. You don't see it at all. And so it's like, no, that's not enough. Like, good for you, but that's not enough.
And like, where are the police life matters people when this black cop resigned? Like, I don't really see a lot of police officers community being like, no, this is one of our own. How dare you? We're going to appeal this. I have yet to really see anything. And so it, again, just kind of like adds to the whole, like, I'm not saying like I'm only rooting for white people to do badly, but I'm just saying it just in the context of police brutality and of the conversation where you know we see black men be murdered mostly at the hand of white individuals, and we see no really direct, fast-paced consequences to that, specifically when they're it's like children. We've seen children shot by police officers, and that didn't even bring about like so swift of a statement. Mm-hmm. So it makes this kind of bittersweet as to like, well, I'm glad that there's more accountability, but I really wish this would have happened in a different incidence where there was like, I think, life lost. Yeah. So
hopefully people will follow suit. I mean, I'm not holding my breath, but I think that this is a drop in the bucket. I mean, I hope that, moving forward, there will be, we have a lot of, like, women of color, and, we're diversifying, like, our political group, our political groups in general. And so I do have some faith that in due time, like, we'll see more of this stuff happening as more people of color and more women and stuff like that step into office.
And not just, like, Congress or governor, but like DA.
Yeah. And so, this is another plug for midterm elections.
Yes.
I'm going to post something maybe today or tomorrow to help you kind of, like, all the people that Obama has endorsed for the midterm elections, which, you shouldn't necessarily base your vote entirely on that, but that's a good place to start, I think.
But who are you going to trust, Obama or Trump?
Honestly. Hopefully if you listen to this podcast, like, you're going to, you already know where your kind of heart lies, but no, we need to really take that seriously so we can get more DAs in office that do things like this.
Yes. And so this wraps up our In the Know. And we're going to transition to our What's Being Slept On, where we're just kind of like extend on some of the conversation that we've started in this segment. Yes.
So I strongly suggest that you wake the fuck up.
Okay, so now for our long-anticipated What's Being Slept On segment for this week, where we'll be discussing Uncle Tom and Tío Tomas. So this week is like filled. This week has just been filled with drama. Mm-hmm. Actually, these last 2 weeks.
That's true.
So I guess to kind of open this up, we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by Uncle Tom, like what that means. And I know that probably a lot of y'all have already heard this term, and so you probably have an understanding. But just to make sure that we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So although the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, as well as the character Uncle Tom, were originally well received, Uncle Tom has become an archetype used to characterize a Black person whose goals are to appease and cater to white people, ultimately not wanting to rock the boat or go against the status quo. Mm-hmm. So, there's definitely a range in there, I think. So there's like, Uncle Toms who are kind of like passively appeasing or catering to white people, but there's a lot of variation. So I think that the ones that we're going to talk about this week are pretty bad.
Yeah.
But, it could be I think that a lot of, I don't know, this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I think that a lot of Black right-wing, like, conservatives, whether you're, like, racist or not, I think are Uncle Toms.
Or considered by...
or could be considered Uncle Toms.
By people.
Yeah.
And so Uncle Tom's Cabin was a book written, like, 150 years ago by a white woman. Mm-hmm. And so, in that book, Uncle Tom is seen as, like, a hero because he saves some women from being killed. He doesn't snitch on them. But ultimately, he kind of still doesn't want to, like, fight against or overthrow the slave masters in a way that people now would want a hero to do. And so for those of you who are like, I've read Uncle Tom's Cabin and he wasn't a bad guy and, it's unfair to refer to him, we acknowledge that, yes, originally Uncle Tom was seen as, like, a good character, mostly by a lot of white people. But we're using the term Uncle Tom as it has been adapted specifically after, like, 1920, where it's a sort of criticism against people who don't want to push too much and who want to just kind of mediate and be in the middle and be neutral and not try to, like we said, rock the boat. Yeah. So I just wanted to...
So I think even somebody that's silent on issues could be considered
yes,
Uncle Tom, right? So it's like you may not necessarily be speaking up in favor of white people, but if you are neutral,
yes,
in matters of racism, then I think that you could be viewed as an Uncle Tom.
Yes.
So, as some of y'all have probably also seen, this week, Angela Rye has been kind of under fire and has been attacked by several right-wing conservatives, including Gina Loudon, who a lot of us are saying she called the B word on CNN. You can go and find that clip. Maybe we should post that too.
Yeah, we'll post the clip. If not, just look at Angela Rye's Instagram and you'll see where she's having kind of a interaction with Gina, and like under her breath she kind of says bitch, but like doesn't finish the word. And so I think it's hilarious because Gina was definitely spewing crazy shit. So that's the Gina Loudon who one of the interactions that Angela Rye had.
And Pastor Daryl C. Scott, who is a black man, the same black man you may recall who was recorded a couple weeks back referring to Trump as the most pro-black president the U.S. has ever had. More so than the only black president. And you know, the person that, I mean, everybody loves Kennedy, and so he's saying, I mean, I don't know where evidence is coming from. He hasn't cited any, but he said that with a lot of confidence. So that actually motivated this week's What Slept On topic. And so we should read the tweet that he put out about Angela. So Pastor Scott said that Tyler Perry just announced that he wants Angela Rye to star in Diary of a Mad Black Woman 2. It's about a woman who is mad because her deck of race cards is completely worn out. And so cousin Angela tweets back, you know what makes me mad? Coonery. You know what coonery is? Telling a bigot he's the most pro-black president in history. Why? For attention. How do you sleep at night? I'm praying for your flock, Pastor.
Yeah. So Pastor Scott, for like unpacking the tweet, Pastor Scott, I think, insult was that if you guys, I don't know, have you seen Diary of a Black Woman? I've seen Diary of a Black. For those of you who have not seen Diary, because that's actually
maybe because you don't like Tyler Perry.
But it's one of those few Tyler Perry movies
that's
that
actually
were good.
Decent,
It's this woman who goes off the deep end because her husband cheats on her. And so I think in comparing her to that woman, he's saying like she's just like crazy, that she's unhinged, that she's unstable.
Which is a stereotype that has been used to characterize black women who are outspoken for a long time. It's a silencing tactic, and for it to come from a black man is disgusting.
So we wanted to unpack that tweet before we even go into things that Pastor Gerald Scott has done and said, but just like the reflection of that criticism towards another black woman and how he stooped to stereotypes about black women that white people have is just kind of reflection of our topic of Uncle Tom and of kind of like not wanting, like using the tools that have been used against us to hurt us.
Yes. And I think, you know, Angela could have, like, here, she did the whole, when they go low, we go high thing. Because I'm sure I know that there are a ton of stereotypes that she could have used against this man in this instance. Particularly the fact that he is a pastor who is seemingly out for dollars. Like, that's what it seems to me, at least. You know, and so that could even be something that, I mean, she said that he was doing it for attention, but I would say he was doing it for money.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like, what is the, what could be the reasoning behind this, aside from that? Aside from really the most pro-black president in history?
And that's insane.
Like, there's just no way. There's no way. And so, I mean, is Pastor Scott an Uncle Tom? Could he be, according to the definition that we're using? I mean, I would say so. Because like Angela is saying, like, he's cooning. Like, you're trying to appease Trump's white base. Well, Trump and his white base.
Yeah.
Like, you're kissing butt, basically.
Yeah. I think that for people who aren't convinced about that tweet and are like, I don't think that that's Uncle Tom. I think he's just being sexist. I think that what makes him Uncle Tom-like for me is his involvement with the 2016 presidential election. So it says that he was, invited by Trump in 2011 when Trump was first considering running for president. So first of all, if you're invited by Trump, I'm going to be like, what? Okay, questionable already. But Pastor Scott was one of the first African-American pastors to support Trump and a key figure in leading other African-American pastors to attend meetings at Trump Tower. And so in 2016, Scott and Donald Trump's personal attorney co-founded the National Diversity Coalition for Trump, which is just beyond crazy. And the group advisory board has leaders from American Muslims for Trump, African American pastors for Trump, and Korean Americans for Trump. So just kind of indicating to me, like, just because you're a minority doesn't mean, like, I used to say, just because you're brown doesn't mean you're down. I think that Trump used Pastor Scott's role as a pastor and role as a black man to kind of make it seem like, one, he's accepting of all people.
Yeah. Same like he did with Condoleezza Rice.
Yes, and two, that he is pro-black, even though he specifically does and says things that are anti-black
and very obviously so.
Yeah, and so the fact that this person, aside from being a black man and standing by a person who is obviously racist, who didn't denounce Nazis in the Charlottesville riot, who didn't denounce Trump when he said that people from Africa come from shithole countries, who doesn't denounce Trump when he calls Omarosa a dog, like, and then you're a pastor and not denounce Trump when he does those things. I just think that it's multifaceted for me. The fact that he's not only supposed to be, you know, a person of color who's supposed to look out for his community, but also a man of God who's supposed to hold people to a higher moral character, and someone, you know, how can you look the other way to a president who has, like, adult actresses? Like, for a president for a president who has adult actresses, like, suing him because that they said they had affairs while his wife had just given birth to their child, and to stand by this president and say such you know, high things about him, and to not be critical about him, where we're supposed to hold each other accountable, we're supposed to hold each other to a higher moral ground. To me, it's like, why is he trying so hard to be on Trump's good side? Why is he trying so hard to be? And I think it's just because, like Angela Rice said, like, particularly for Pastor Scott, it's for attention. Like, I think he loves the fact that he's one of the few minorities that Trump, like, leans on, that certain white people in Trump's base will definitely pull on things that he says, will pull on him as a Christian person, will pull on him as a black man and say, Trump is a racist because he has this black man in his corner. Yeah,
he definitely has an ulterior motive, and it's not for the betterment of his people. It is for himself. And, you know, I also don't want this to be misinterpreted as, you know, as us feeling like if you aren't down for your people, then you're in the wrong. Yeah. Automatically. Yeah. It's like, no, like when we had the conversation, our original conversation about Candace Owens and Kanye West, I do not mind Black conservatives.
Yeah, yeah.
I do think that to be Black and conservative, you have to do a lot more mental work than to be Black and Democratic.
Well, especially now.
Yeah.
In this presidency.
Yes. So we're not talking about, because I know that, we all know that 60, 70 years ago, Black people were Republicans. We get it. But we're talking about today, okay? We're talking about today. And I think that, yes, you have to do a lot more work to be a Republican. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to ignore a lot of things. Mm-hmm. A lot of the stuff that Trump says, you have to be willing to look the other way and to work hard to not see yourself in those words. It takes a lot. And so I think that because even though we are open to conservatism, it has to be genuine. It can't be forced. And what they're doing is forced. You are forcing yourself to call Trump pro-Black.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's no way that you see that. Yeah. You don't see any evidence of that.
Yeah.
Now, Trump has not directly, I would say, picked on Black people to the same extent as he has immigrants, to the same extent as he has Muslims.
Women.
But, women, literally everybody. But best believe it's a coming. Like, early on, he did talk about Chicago and how he wanted to declare martial law on them and all that stuff. For whatever reason, he's been pretty silent on that issue. And I think that, there's that whole saying that if you consistently ignore the oppression of others, it'll eventually become your turn, and there will be no one there to defend you.
Yes.
And so that's my big, we need to stop, because I do know that there are a lot of Black people that feel that way, that are like, oh, well, he's not directly picking on us, so he's fine by me. It's like, no, that's not okay.
Yeah, and so on that extreme, we have Pastor Daryl C. Scott, which is the one that was critical against Angela Rye. But we also wanted to bring up Pastor John Gray. So initially, Ebony made a comment about how some people don't consider Uncle Tom's people who are like Pastor Scott, who say and make claims that Trump is the most pro-Black president ever. But other people would be critical that say that people who try to stay neutral and silent and not speak up are also at fault. And so this is an example we bring up with Pastor John Gray. And so this is someone that Ebony has had.
Yeah, I have a really soft spot in my heart for him, because he pastored at Lakewood Church alongside Joel Osteen, and he is an amazing minister. Like, every time I've heard him preach, I've always felt so moved by it. So when I started seeing all these stories surface about him and his relationship with Trump, like, I was just so brokenhearted. But apparently he and his family are like All Lives Matter representatives. He did not denounce Joel Osteen when Joel Osteen was under fire for locking the doors on his church. John Gray was also praying for Trump during the time that Pastor Scott said that he was the most pro-Black president in history. So he hasn't been very vocal about his support for Trump, because I've listened to several of his interviews and I haven't really heard him talk about it. But apparently he is, like, behind closed doors, so he's not the pastor who has his face, plastered all over the place, standing side by side with Trump. But he is, like, in the room when these other pastors are doing that. So he might turn down the photo ops, but he's there. Yeah,
and I was reading this article that said that, Pastor Gray, when he was invited to talk to Trump, said, like, Steve Harvey and Kanye had said that they wanted to discuss things that impacted the African-American community. And so that he said that he didn't want it to be televised. He didn't want it to be in attention. But that, unfortunately, when he got there, Trump had cameras, and they placed his seat right next to Trump, and Trump just took a bunch of pictures with him, and they didn't talk about any of the things that he said they were going to talk about. And so I think that when you allow yourself to be used by someone...
Yeah, the same thing that happened with Harvey.
I think that maybe you have good intentions, but when you get there and you see that you're just being used, and I think it's your responsibility to say... I thought it was going to be this. It wasn't this. I didn't want this to happen. And he used me for this. And this is not something that I stand for, at least. Yeah.
But I don't understand how you could be so disillusioned. Like, why do you think that he's going to turn down opportunities to talk to all these Black celebrities and political figures, but talk to you?
Yeah.
And it's like, John Gray, I think he left his post at Lakewood to start his own church, I think somewhere else in the South. I want to say Atlanta. I'm not 100%. But obviously, if he's putting himself in these spaces where he's going to have predominantly Black congregations, it's no wonder why he doesn't want all this stuff to be televised and publicized and all of that. That makes total sense, because it's like, who's going to be supporting you?
Yeah.
Like, people are going to be looking at you all types of sideways. Like, you looking real funny in the light. You over here meeting with Trump and getting nothing done. Like,
yeah, I mean, the fact that Trump didn't talk to him about the issues and only wanted photo ops kind of tells you that Trump only really wants darker people to be around him so that he can say he's pro-Black, but he doesn't really care about the Black or African-American community. And those are things we talk about when we're like, Uncle Toms come in different forms. And for me, being an Uncle Tom doesn't just mean saying that Trump is the most pro-black president ever, but also just like allowing yourself to be used and not standing up and being critical and saying like, no, like I'm not going to let you just use my color as a way for you to not to kind of hide a little or diffuse the fact that you are a bigot and that you are racist.
Yeah.
And
I mean, him and his wife and kids in that All Lives Matter photo shoot was a little bit... I mean, I have to admit that I did kind of look the other way. Not look the other way, but I still had love in my heart for him after those pictures surfaced. Like, I was like, what is... I mean, because that's a very blatant move. Because that wasn't something that just... That's not a natural... Like, you know, that's not something that just happens. You intentionally sought out these All Lives Matter shirts.
Yeah.
You made sure that y'all all matched.
Yeah.
Y'all found a photographer. Y'all all took these pictures. Like, what is the point that you're trying to make?
And
you know,
some people would argue, well, politics and church shouldn't mix. Well, then he should have not done either.
Yeah, he didn't have to do anything.
Yeah, he could have not said Black
Lives Matter.
Lives Matter.
I'm not saying you don't have to put on a Black Lives Matter shirt and do a photo shoot. Uh-huh. Nobody was like, where's John Gray's Black Lives Matter photo shoot? Nobody was questioning that. You went out of your way to make the opposite point, which leads me to question your character. Yeah. Sadly. Because I like him a lot. So this next person, I think, is probably a more blatant example. Or
probably the most Uncle Tom
like the
person.
epitome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually stumbled across this Jesse Lee Peterson person because in a conversation about racism with an older white man, he actually brought up, I guess, in South Africa, there are white farmers whose land is being like stripped from them. Yeah. By, I think, the government. Yeah. It sounded like the government.
Because they're quote unquote white.
Yeah. So the argument that this Jesse Lee Peterson person is making is that because these white farmers are white, the government in South Africa is taking their land. And so we could have a conversation about that, about how they got the land in the first place, probably through apartheid, which nobody wants to talk about. I'm sure I didn't listen to this. I didn't listen to this episode of his radio show, but I'm sure he didn't mention anything about apartheid. So I guess yesterday on Jesse Lee Peterson's radio show called the Jesse Lee Peterson Radio Show, he had a discussion about these white farmers. Yes. And was basically using this as a means of showing how white people too can be affected by racism, negatively affected by racism. Yes. So to give you a little bit of background, this Jesse Lee Peterson person is an American right-wing activist, author, and media personality. He is also a member of Choose Black America, an organization of African Americans who oppose illegal immigration to the United States. See, got you there, because I'm sure you thought Choose Black America sounded
we were both like, okay, and then we read what it was, and we're like, oh shit.
It's like, way to turn that smile upside down. So on September 21st, 2005, Peterson penned a column for World Net Daily in which he suggested the majority of the African American people stranded in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina were, quote-unquote, welfare pampered, quote-unquote, lazy, and, quote-unquote, immoral. Peterson also criticized New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin for blaming President Bush for his lack of response to the crisis, stating that responsibility to perform legally and practically fell first on the mayor of New Orleans. Peterson has also claimed that African Americans are too dependent on affirmative action, calling it an entitlement. Peterson thanked God and white people for slavery, adding that if it weren't for the slave trade, blacks may have never made it to the United States. And he also described traveling on slave ships as akin to being on an overcrowded airplane. He revealed in a video released on March 5th, 2012, his belief that, quote, I think that one of the greatest mistakes America made was to allow women the opportunity to vote, unquote.
And I bet you some of you were like, okay, I'm with the affirmative action. Like, even some people of color are like, okay, yes, affirmative action can go. Okay, illegal immigration can go. But if you are still with him after he thanks God for white people, for slavery.
Yeah, it's like, the reason that black people don't like affirmative action is because they think that it gives white people essentially permission to say you didn't earn this position. Mm-hmm. But if it weren't for white people feeling that way, Black people would love affirmative action. It rectifies the history of wrongdoing in this country. Yeah. It's like if you've been prevented from getting something for centuries and suddenly we're allowing you to get it, but we're still not giving it to you. It's like, okay, now you're forced to allow us to be represented in spaces where you had kept us out of for so long.
Yeah.
So affirmative action in and of itself, I think, is a good thing. Him talking about entitlement. Entitled to what? Entitled to what? Stuff that white people have been entitled to and been receiving, irrespective of merit, for centuries. Like, I don't understand the thinking. I'm, like, really struggling to see eye to eye. Now, I do know Black conservatives. I have a Black conservative uncle,
Shout out.
Yeah, who's like, no, whose political views, obviously, I don't agree with all the time. But what I do respect about my uncle is that he's not like, oh, I'm going to agree with the right all the time, no matter what. That's where my loyalty lies. Everything that they do and say, I agree with, just because that's my affiliation. No, he takes everything in turn. Yes, I agree with this. No, I don't agree with that. Yes, I agree with this. No, I don't agree with that. He was even down to vote for Bernie Sanders and thought that Bernie Sanders made way more sense than Trump, even though he himself is Republican and conservative. But it's like, I think that that's what's important to do on both sides. Like, even for liberals, like, I think that you should be able to, take each thing in turn. If, I don't imagine this happening, but if Trump does push forward some kind of policy or something that seems like it makes sense to you or is a good idea, then totally go for that. Like, I don't think that we should feel like forced or compelled to stay with whatever party we're affiliated with just because we're affiliated with it. If we don't agree with something that they say, then that's fine. Don't agree with it. But, like, this man is just an idiot. Like, you're talking, like, what? What? You thank God and white people for slavery.
Yeah, no, and to say that slave ships are akin to being on a crowded airplane.
Like, what an idiot.
I think that's, and then, we didn't mention that he's a guest of Sean Hannity's show.
Mm-hmm.
And
if a regular guest.
And if you know Sean Hannity is, he's an unstable man who uses he says things that are inaccurate all the time, and when he's called out on a lot of his inaccuracy, he doesn't have very good rebuttals for that, and that could be a whole separate episode.
Yeah.
But when I showed Ebony this person, like, we were just like, what? He's Black?
My brain is still struggling to process that. Like, when I saw his face in that little thumbnail, I'm like, what?
Yes.
Because it's like, who lost you? Who dropped you? Like, I mean, I just don't how much hate can you have for your community to be able to be, because, like, Black people not listening to this show. Other than to maybe talk shit about it. Like, probably all of his listeners are white.
I mean, the guy
that was talking to me was basically saying, oh, like, Black people use every opportunity to call things racist. Even the most minute things are racist, but nobody's talking about these white farmers in South Africa. And so it's like, it just so happened that I was talking to Zelma about this conversation that we're having today. And this Jesse Lee Peterson just discussed this on his podcast yesterday.
Yes, that was his topic.
Yes, and so it's like, these are the people that are listening to his show, people that don't believe in racism.
Yes.
And they're using the things that he says because he's a Black man.
Yes.
So it's like, oh, now I see that, now you can say that there's some truth to these thought processes because it's not just a white message. Like, Black people are also spewing these messages, so it must be true, right?
Yes.
Because you wouldn't have a Black man talking down on Black people if there weren't any reason to do it, or if it wasn't justifiable. And so that's that. I mean, because that's the same issue that we had with Candace Owens. Like,
yep,
you're saying things for popularity. You're saying things for attention. Like Angela Rye said, like, this is the attention that you're seeking. And if you were actually, because Candace Owens' whole thing, who, just to remind y'all, is a right-wing conservative political commentator who could be heard saying things like, young Black people today use slavery as a crutch and are more upset about slavery than actual slaves were, among many other things. Like, she has tons of, like, things on YouTube, clips at UCLA where you could see her just talking crazy. But the problem that I have is that if you're talking to roomfuls of white people, what is your mission really? If you're saying that you want to improve the lived experience of Black people in this country, why is it that all of your supporters are white?
Yes.
Like
and you're speaking to white people.
Yeah. And it's like you're talking down on Black people to white people. So no, your intent is not to make life better for Black people. Your intent is to essentially incite race wars and riots, because that's what happens. Like, you're giving white people the language and the fuel to be like, oh yeah, like this is what this Black woman said, so it must be okay to say.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple examples of some Uncle Toms that we've come across, and then also wanted to highlight some Tío Tomases from, I'm a Latina woman, I'm an immigrant, and we definitely have our own crazies in our community. And so wanted to start off with there's actually, been examples of some Latino Nazis. So I was looking.
I still can't believe it.
I know, it's crazy. So I don't know if you recall the Charlottesville riot, where there was like the alt-right Nazis had like their march, Unite the Right, and then there was some counter protesters, but there were some mostly Latino males. Specifically, one of them was Christopher Ray Monzon, a 22-year-old Cuban American who's associated with the League of the South, which is considered by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a neo-Confederate hate group. He was actually arrested for charging at protesters in a separate Florida demonstration. So he's like a traveling Nazi. And then another one, Nick Fuentes, a 19-year-old student. And yes, I'm going to call him Fuentes, even though I'm sure he calls himself Fuentes or something. He has an alt-right podcast called America First. Interesting. I wonder where he got that from. And said that he had to leave Boston University in the aftermath of the Charlottesville protest after receiving death threats over his participation. And so this article basically was saying that there's an increase of Latino people who are considering themselves Klansmen and considering themselves neo-Nazis. And this is due to the fact that they are kind of associating themselves more as white, aligning themselves more as white and less as Latino or immigrants. And so there's also an example of another person, Ramos, who says that, and this is kind of what I'm trying to wrap my mind around. He says that he rejects any notion that he's racist, insisting that he went to Charlottesville in defense of free speech and as a show of force against left-wing groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, which is kind of like an anarchist group. But he made this hour-long video, which he posted to Facebook, when he became agitated at people who were kind of saying that, how could you march with the KKK and, who were there to not just protest, but if you saw pictures and later stories of charges that they were actually assaulting Black people. And so I'm going to use a racial slur because this is what he says, but I'm Latina, and so I feel like it's okay because I'm using it in the context of how he's saying it, but I apologize to any other Latinos who take offense. So he says, yeah, I stood side by side with racist people, but they weren't racist to me. They didn't call me a spick. They didn't call me a fucking wetback. They didn't say nothing as such. We stood for the same common goal, which he says is free speech. And so what I'm interpreting to there is maybe
I'm saying, what is the common goal? What is the common goal? So they don't use racial epithets toward you because you're fighting for the common goal, which is anti another group.
Yes. Nazis are anti-Semitic, anti-Black, they're they're anti-LGBT. They are actually, historically, their mission was, they want an all-white,
genocide.
They want genocide. And so to think that,
because they didn't call him names
at that particular rally. And so when I hear things like that, I'm I was telling Ebony, I think a common goal might also be anti-Blackness, because there are a lot of if you identify as white and not as Latino, and if you're like, you don't see me as that, so you don't see me as a Latino, you see me as white, then I align with you, and so I'm totally fine being anti-Black and being anti-whatever.
But you can't buy whiteness.
And
that's what he's trying to do. He's like, oh, if I identify as white, and if I stand side by side with the whitest among them,
yes,
then I can be down.
So this is I'm calling these people our Tío Tomases, because they are in fact not just saying, I mean, Jesse Lee Peterson is like, I'm a Black man, I'm a Black person who's pro-Trump, but these people are like, I'm white.
And I'm a Nazi.
And I'm a Nazi.
Latino Nazi? That doesn't even make sense. Those two words don't make sense side by side.
Apparently, it's a new emerging thing. And so now that there are such things as Latino Nazis, and it's just kind of, I was unaware about this until we started investigating for this episode. And so, it was just something that I came across, and I was like, wow, this is an Uncle Tom of a Tío Tomás if I've never seen one. And then, we have the Latino Nazis on one end, and on the other hand, we have people like Marco Rubio, who I have a hate-hate relationship with, because I feel like Marco Rubio he portrays himself as so much for the people, but he does so many things that hurt the community that he says that he wants to help. And so I know many Latinos who are anti-immigration, and I know many formerly undocumented people who are anti-immigration, and I know many immigrants who are anti-immigration, or who say we need to limit it, or who say that, you need to do it the right way. You're entitled to that opinion, but what gets me...
How would you be here?
I know. What gets me in particular about Marco Rubio is the most recent thing that made me mad was, we've been talking about the children, the immigrant children being detained in what I would call cages. And so Marco Rubio, instead of kind of denouncing and saying that it was wrong for children to be detained in cages, he kind of just said, well, we should detain families together. And so while he was giving this press conference, and if he didn't, his vote is the Hispanic vote. That's who he relies on in Florida. He speaks Spanish, he needs that vote. So he was speaking to the Hispanic community, telling them, feeding them this bullshit, telling them, there has to be a process, there has to be an order, there has to be a way to do this with politics and with legislation. And so, yes, it's unfair to separate them. We should put them together, instead of denouncing and saying this is inhumane. And so a lot of Latino activists went to his speech, his press conference, and they didn't let him finish, and he couldn't finish his speech. And they were calling him out, and they said, basically telling him, he's just, he's wrong for not calling out and saying that this is inhumane. And so when you have people like Marco Rubio, who are not only not denouncing when things are inhumane that this administration is doing as part of the immigrant community, because he's, he has immigrants in his family, but it wasn't even an argument about do this the right way, do this whatever. He was just saying, let's detain them together. And to not even be able to call out inhumanity when it's inhumanity, to me, is like Tío Tomás. You are literally up Trump's ass so hard that you can't even, stand up for these children and say these children shouldn't be detained at all. We shouldn't be doing something that many presidents have not bothered to really enact, even though this has been people have said this has been on the books, people haven't done it because it's fucked up. And so people you can be a Marco Rubio who is, not a Nazi, but that doesn't mean that you're not also just trying to, what I would argue, lie to your people, use them for votes, and engage in things and conversations that are hurting people from your community. And so, just like we had said in the beginning of this segment, there's different levels of Uncle Tomness, there's different types of Uncle Tomness, and then they come across all different. I'm sure, for any Asian American listeners, or Native American listeners, or Indian American listeners, you guys know people in your community that are, because apparently Trump has everyone for Trump. Asian Americans for
everybody
Trump.
for Trump.
Latinos for Trump.
Blacks for Trump.
Blacks for Trump.
Gays for Trump.
Yes, gays
like,
for
what?
Trump. They are women for Trump. Like, they are everywhere. And so we just wanted to start this conversation and just kind of highlight that it is more the woke movement, the movement against calling out the negative actions that this administration does is even more complicated when we have people within our own community that not only do I have conversations with people outside my community, but I have to have conversations with Marco Rubio's and Latino Nazis, like making it twice as hard, I think, to even engage in change.
Yeah. I mean, if you are one of those people, feel free to write in, and I guess we would like to understand that thought. I'm like, I don't know. I would just like to hear how you think.
Yeah.
Like, because I genuinely don't get it. I genuinely don't understand a black man that is thanking white people for slavery.
Yeah, or a Latino who's a Nazi.
It just does. Those are counterintuitive. They don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, those identities do not work together. And so I don't know how you're reconciling that. Like, how can you be a member of a group that hates your people?
Yeah,
that
literally
doesn't want your people to exist.
I mean, you're part of a hate group who, like, I think would kill me.
Yeah, it's like, it doesn't. Like, literally, your membership in this group is the only reason why they can tolerate you. Because they don't like you. You're being tolerated.
They would probably not intermarry with you.
No, they would. What? Oh my gosh, definitely not.
Yeah.
You want to see them use some racial epithets, you get with one of their daughters.
Yeah, no, for real. So we just wanted to kind of, present, some people that we had learned about this week, some things, concepts we had learned about, present that to you guys, and also just kind of bring that into conversation with Uncle Tom and the whole Angela Rye thing. Because what we try to do is we try to bring something in current events and have a deeper conversation about things because everything is part of a greater conversation. And the Angela Rye thing between the pastor was more than just
the fact that he's a pastor.
Yeah. It is so there's so many complexities. So we'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Even if you disagree, we get people who disagree with us and who send us comments, and we try to very calmly have conversations, but we're not by any means suggesting that everyone should. I mean, even Ebony and I don't agree exactly on everything that we talk about, and we try to bring both my perspective as a Latina immigrant and Ebony's perspective as a Black woman into this conversation, because Uncle Tom was originally a term used for the African American or Black community. So if you have any questions, any feedback, please feel free to email us at woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com. You can always follow us on Instagram at wokeishpodcast. We tend to post, videos from the week that sometimes we talk about in our episodes. We also post clips from our episodes, and so we love to hear any feedback from you guys. And you can also follow us on Twitter at
wokeishtalk.
Yes. So thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to next week.
Bye.